everybody to this session about developing a robust city vision and plan. My name is Astrid Rubin. I am an associate at Capia. And before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. Of course, we're all meeting in different places. I live on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to them, their culture, their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to extend those respects to the traditional owners of the land on which you're all sitting today. So we have two wonderful speakers for you this morning. We've got Leanne Hodyl and Desley Renton, both managing directors of their respective firms Hodyl Co and Renton and Co. Leanne is an industry leader with 20 years of experience across urban policy and design projects, working towards future developments for Australian cities. And Desley also has another 20 years of experience in community engagement, both in government and the not-for-profit sector. You might also know Desley from her work in IAP2, including Australasian and international president roles. Our presenters met while they were both working at City of Melbourne. And in 2020, they collaborated to undertake a research and engagement project into best practice city visions and city plans. This work included research of 30 cities from across the world. So today, Desley and Leanne will be presenting an overview of the processes and findings, and will share the innovative engagement practices from a number of the international examples. Their talk this morning will take us on a journey from Copenhagen to Fremantle and a few places in between. Mm-hmm. So in these times, I think it'll be nice to live vicariously through their research. Mm-hmm. We will be recording this session this morning. If you would like a copy of the recording, you'll have to sign up to our newsletter. All the videos from the conference will be published via the newsletter. The link will be on the screen soon, if it isn't already. And we'll also be sharing slides and survey feedback surveys via that newsletter. So just keep an eye out and make sure you're signed up. During the session today, we will have opportunities for quick polls, and you can use the chat function to the side to pose questions to the presenters or just make some comments as we go through. We will also be posting a link to the Facebook page, which will provide a networking space for presenters and attendees and anybody who wants to chat about the session or ask questions. It'll be up in the chat function in a moment if it's not already, and we look forward to seeing the conversation continue on that Facebook page. But for now, I think that's enough from me. I will hand over to Desley and Leanne, our presenters this morning. And take it away.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, everybody. And it's wonderful to have so many people on the line. I have to say, we were a bit surprised at the number of people registered for this session. So hopefully we can answer all of your questions. We have got a presentation to go through. Leanne has started screen sharing. Thank you. I'll just start by setting the scene about how this research project came about. We didn't actually set out to undertake a research project into best practice city plans and visions when we were contracted by the City of Darebin late last year. Leanne and I, as a collaborative teams, won that piece of work from Darebin when they were embarking on developing their own city vision and plan. And we were actually quite a way into designing that process for them. Of course, the world completely changed with COVID-19. There were a lot of discussions with the team members in the city about which direction we would take this. Would we continue to work in developing their city vision plan using online engagement? And we really all arrived at a position where we thought that wasn't going to deliver the most robust process for them.
Excuse me, Desley, sorry, can you just fix your microphone? It seems to be tapping maybe on a brooch or on a keyboard or something. Thank you.
Thank you. And we came to the view that we really needed to either stop that process or do something completely different. And being the fabulous and forward-thinking organisation that the City of Darebin are, they agreed with us that there could be something wonderful result from, and we decided to look into what really constituted a best practice city vision and plan globally and to learn from others. So we really used the time and the budget to do that piece of work, which was essentially setting Darebin up for a really good launching pad, if you like, for them to undertake their work, which they still intend to do. So that's how this project came about. It was an extremely joyful project, particularly in the COVID environment, because there's nothing more wonderful than getting on the phone and talking to somebody on the other side of the world about something they really love and were passionate about. So hopefully that sense of passion comes through in this project. Thank you. So today we've got just under 90 minutes now. We will probably spend the first half of that talking to you, stepping you through the overview of the project and sharing our findings, which we're going to get into fairly quickly. We encourage you to use the chat function. We have got somebody monitoring that. So please feel free to pose questions throughout. Astrid will be triaging those, but we will have time at the end as well for more of an open dialogue.
Great, thanks, Des. Hope everyone can hear me okay and that's loud enough. So I'll start by talking about what is a city vision. So as Des has explained, where the sort of generation of this project came from is that Darebin was seeking to do a city futures plan. And one of the first questions that came up was really about, well, what is the difference between a city vision and what is a city plan? And so the research that we did sought to answer this question. You can see here that what we've defined as a city vision is something that outlines a clear and formal sense of where the city wants to be in the long term, and importantly, what is required to achieve that desired outcome. And, sorry, my phone's doing things. And that a city vision is usually defined either by strategic directions, say a carbon positive city, or it can be defined by articulating the desired characteristics of the city's future, for example, a welcoming place. So you can see on the screen here, the city of Logan, one of the cities that we studied, their vision was particularly focused around innovation and being a smart city. So their kind of key catchphrase was that they were a home of civic innovation. So this is really one of those sort of strategic examples of city visions. By contrast, another city that we looked at, Hobart, had a very evocative vision, which was very much about tapping into the sense of place. And so their vision is that Hobart breathes. Connections between nature, history, culture, businesses and each other are the heart of our city. We are brave and caring. We resist mediocrity and sameness. As we grow, we remember what makes this place special. We walk in the fresh air between all the best things in life. There couldn't be two starker visions, I think, than the sort of City of Logan Smart one and the Hobart one, but they're both really compelling and importantly linked to what the place was trying to and the community was trying to achieve. I think one of the early things we also tapped into is that most of them don't include a sort of sweeping visual graphic of the city. They rely on metaphors or statements like this to talk about what the city could be. They don't try and do a sort of Jetsons view of what a futuristic city looks like, but they really use evocative language or strategic language to articulate that. Importantly, there is a difference between a city vision and a city plan, and this diagram captures the distinction between the two and also the relationship between the two. And really importantly, you can do a city vision on its own. You can have a vision, which is that standalone, independent statement about what is the shared future of the city. But you really can't, or perhaps we should say shouldn't, do a city plan without a city vision. And so a city vision sits inside a city plan and then guides the plan. And the key difference is that a plan will go further. It will actually talk about more specific detail about the way that the city vision will be realised, what it will take to implement it, including responsibilities, partnerships, specific projects or programs. So they're clearly distinct. And one of the key things that we were trying to communicate and we found through this research was the importance of knowing what you're actually doing at the beginning. Is it a vision or is it a plan? And they each require different approaches and levels of engagement and levels of time. It was a research project, so method is critical. So what you see here on the slide is an overview of how we approach this. As Des has explained, this did evolve through the project, and we put this method together to try and ensure we had a really robust approach to capture the best findings that we could. What we were really interested in was learning from the globally leading examples of city visions and plans. So we looked at 30 across the globe, so a mixture of Australian and international examples. We also did a literature review. A key part of our practice is always tapping into what we already know and what the academia has already discovered, and learning from that and building from that. So we did a comprehensive literature review into community engagement and how that's been practiced across these city visions and plans. And then we progressed with a deep dive into 10 specific cities. These were selected because they had, they demonstrated aspirational leadership, because they were cohesive and visually compelling. They were suitable for a broad audience. They demonstrated effectiveness of community engagement, and that was clear in the plan itself. They were contemporary, so we only selected ones that were done in the last, say, 10 years. And the 10 really also included a diversity of locations and city scales. So there were some amazing ones in the list of 30. For example, New York has a fantastic plan, but translating the kind of key findings from the New York plan to a Darebin scale of 160,000 people, we thought was not as relevant or relatable enough for our exercise. And importantly, we included a mixture of just visions and also city plans, and we included 2 which were specifically selected because they were disaster response plans. And so that was Detroit and Christchurch after the earthquakes. We then went on to do interviews with leaders of 6 of those selected examples, which was just an amazing opportunity. And as Des has said, an absolute delight to talk to people around Australia and the world about what it took to get these plans up, what it took to get them delivered, and what sort of impacts they were having and what they had learnt, because obviously these are complex projects. They don't always run smoothly as well. And so they had some fantastic lessons about what worked and what didn't work for them. So the 10 cities that we went into in more detail, you can see there. So in Australia, it was Newcastle, Hobart, Fremantle and Logan. And then overseas, we looked at Dublin, Bristol, Christchurch, Copenhagen, Reading in the UK and Detroit. And as I said, these are selected because of their diversity of locations, types of visions or plans that they were, and their scales. And equally, because in doing that first review of the 30, they also included often something very unique, a unique approach or a unique implementation method, for example, that we really wanted to capture.
Thank you, Leanne. So we've got a number of findings, 6 key findings to step you through. And the first one, be clear about the purpose of your vision or plan. And whilst that might not sound that unusual, those of you who are online from the community engagement space will know how important this is and how often it's difficult for somebody to actually articulate the purpose of why they want to do something or what it is they are planning to do. So it's probably not a surprising first key finding. We did find in the research that we did, there were 3 sort of areas of drivers for the purpose of developing a city plan. The first one was about targeting or solving a problem, identifying a problem to be solved. For example, in Fremantle, their plan was very much around addressing a lack of housing diversity, particularly lack of affordable housing in the area, and they were very articulate and clear about that. Logan, as Leanne has mentioned, also had a very clear purpose around sort of reinventing themselves, and the way they expressed that was they really, through their process, wanted to sort of shake off the shackles, if you like, of being the poor cousin to Brisbane or the Gold Coast, and help themselves to shine as the emerging innovative sort of hub that they are. Another reason, and Leanne, you just touched on this as well, was about bringing the community together post-crisis. Detroit from the global financial crisis. And that particular example was incredibly interesting because it had a really rocky start and did not capture people's interest initially, and sort of fell apart and had to come back together again. Christchurch, again, after the earthquakes. And the lovely clarity around the call to action for something, a place like Christchurch was just so enveloping, and I think I'm just trying to remember the exact words, but it was, Christchurch will never be the same again. And that was the mantra on the street, if you like. But the call to action was, no, it will never be the same again. It's going to be so much better. And the volume of people who participated in that, because it was really clearly understood what the aim was. The other reason that we identified for articulating why the city plan was needed was to shape a broad vision and community led around growth. And Newcastle in New South Wales and Hobart both really were grappling with those topics. The growth of the city, and working with the community to develop a city plan to help shape and direct that growth was clearly articulated in their purpose. So, articulate why the city plan is needed. It doesn't need to be all things to all people. I mean, this is this message came through very clearly with Dublin, and you can see the quote there. It's not necessarily about being right; it's about being ready. A second finding is the act of preparing the city plan is as important as any identified actions within the plan itself. And this is why the plans that emerged as the most rich had the incredible engagement throughout the process. And not just a community engagement, but stakeholder engagement, and a long process to undertake that. So in summary, how it is articulated through the research was that the value of constructing the vision is twofold. There's the conversation, the dialogue about which brings the community together in a very cohesive way, and of course cross-fertilises all of those wonderful ideas and results in the plan. And then there's the transformative sort of outcome of those things. And the link, as you can see, articulated in the Hobart Community Vision, the link to the actual action planning. The city plan or the community vision itself does not. We didn't come across any that articulated actions. So in 10 years' time, we will have 1,000 more kilometres of road, but very much more guided by the principles and the shared desires of the community, and then actions articulated in the cascading documents, 4-year council plans, for example, annual plans, etc. There's a lovely graphic there that you can see about what, from Bristol, what a city plan is and what it isn't. And this was just wonderful to come across in the research, because it really summed up for us what we were hearing across the research about. It doesn't necessarily need to be a perfect document. These things are guiding and can be interpreted by the many different players who sit under a community plan or a city plan in the way that they see fit. And there's something about a looseness of that really came across in research, that if we are striving, for example, for a city that's wanting to manage growth, then there'll be different ways of doing that for the many different players who are involved. But the thing we all agree on is that that's what we are aiming for and aspiring towards.
Thanks, Des. So the second key finding was about defining the issues and key drivers with the communities and with stakeholders. What was really fascinating about the 10 plans that we really looked into a deep dive is the different drivers that actually shapes them. And that really flowed all the way through to then the vision and the actual plan or implementation plan as well. So what's captured on the screen here is a neat summary of all the different mix of drivers that actually triggered the plan, or more importantly, were sort of defined through the development of the plan, or a bit of both. So really, you can see here that some of those things ranged from responding to economic development and job growth, just generally population growth, issues around housing affordability and diversity, climate change, social inequity. In Detroit and Dublin, there were issues around crime, for example, that were specific to that place. And again, coming back to Hobart, you know, if you can just recall that I just read out that vision, their real key driver was concern about losing their character and identity. It doesn't mean that they didn't care about these other issues as well. They did encompass these other issues, but really that was the sole kind of center of gravity that they were really focused on in their city vision. And that obviously flowed through to the vision itself and how that's articulated. The important thing about these issues is that they obviously weren't developed in a box by the people who are creating the plan. Critically, they were actually developed with the stakeholders themselves and with the community. And like obviously a key thing as like all good community engagement, as I'm sure this audience knows well, and as Des has already outlined about the importance of a purpose, is also about defining the clear role for the community, whether they're leading, partnering, or providing feedback. And that was demonstrated well through these examples and connected to these issues and the problem. So, for example, in Dublin, their key issues that they were trying to resolve were particularly focused around the economic growth of the city, job growth in the city, and some of their transport challenges. The Dublin example is a really interesting one because unlike many of the examples that were led by government, the Dublin one was actually led by the local Chamber of Commerce. So the local economic leaders gathering together to say, these are the problems that we see. And so their focus was really particularly about bringing in the industry partners, as well as they brought in local researchers, as well as professionals and the community to really focus on that problem. Fremantle is another really interesting example where they did this well. The problem was just very clear. They had a housing diversity problem. So they had large areas of suburban housing on large lots that were sort of, you know, generally 3-bedroom houses, 2-bathroom houses. And they really were, it was really no longer fit for purpose for the way that the population was evolving. So they had a very clear goal in mind to improve housing diversity. And in both of those examples, they were very clear about the level of influence that was available to the community in those. The other important comment about transparency is about being clear about any background work that had been done. There was a diversity of approaches across the cities that we studied, where some started the conversation in a very sort of blank slate and actually asked the community and stakeholders to define the issues with them. Whereas others like Hobart actually did a lot of background research first before they approached the community. So they approached the community with really quality information about trends in the city over the past 10 years. They did early research into international examples about what a vision could be. And then that was used to sort of start a conversation with the community about what resonated both for them. As the key issue for them was the identity of the city, that really then, by sort of providing all the hard facts, if you like, that then meant they could focus the conversation about understanding how the city sees itself through the eyes of the community, and the information, the sort of, if you like, just very data, quantitative stuff was prepared and provided to the community. Going out early and being informed is another important aspect that was common in all of these plans. again, I'm sure this will not sound that unfamiliar, the importance of this to this audience, but the importance of building trust slowly was just so critical. And Christchurch, even though it was in a disaster response and they were sort of trying to do things very quickly and recognising that they had to be very sensitive in their response, but also very proactive to send a clear message to that the people responsible for preparing the plan wanted to work closely with the community and really create this sense that everyone was in it together. So they started with a share an idea campaign, which some of you may be familiar with. They got over 100,000 ideas in a 6-week period. So really tapping into a highly emotive environment. Pretty much, most people in that community were affected by that tragedy. So that was just a really effective way to start early and appropriately with the right conversation. Utilising a diversity of views and opinions was, again, goes without saying, was really critical. Excuse me. This is essential again across all of the cities that we talked to, but some great examples were, for example, in Reading, where this plan again was quite different because it was led by the university sector. And so they brought in a whole diverse range of people to have conversations about what the city could be. And I think generating that conversation out of a university was a really interesting approach, and it actually enabled, I think, a quite different conversation and perhaps a more diverse set of views to be more readily sort of engaged with because it wasn't being delivered by a government agency. And just to capture, this is that quote that Des mentioned before. So, and to me, this is just so compelling, particularly in the kind of COVID world we're in, and obviously going to be moving into a new COVID normal and hopefully a post-COVID, not new normal. But the importance of saying, well, actually, how do you harness these challenges to create a new city vision where it's even better than what we had before? It's not just about recovering what was lost, it's about really looking forward.
Elements of appreciative inquiry and bringing people together around what can be and hope was a thread we saw through these projects. So a third key finding, don't do it alone. And again, that probably doesn't sound that unusual, but it was something that was repeated over and over again in the case studies that we looked into. And there was considerable time and effort spent by these cities in developing that cross-industry approach. Very often, these plans were initiated by a government body, either a local government or a state government. I mean, there are some exceptions. Leanne just mentioned the Chamber of Commerce in Dublin. But all of them worked very hard to develop that cross-sector approach. And you can see the model that many of them use, the triple or quadruple helix, to bring together key sectors and leverage that creative thinking or innovation. It was framed really beautifully by Dublin, who said we were trying to solve the problem of the structures we had, in recognition that if you're in government or in the tertiary sector or business community, you do tend to look at the world through a particular lens. And given these plans were whole of city plans, it was important to really help people and enable people to think outside of the box. And the University of Reading described it as giving people the space to understand the issues. So there was a long lead-up time for the successful plans that we looked at in developing that cross-industry approach and sharing the wisdom, cross-fertilisation of ideas, etc. Establishing those effective partnerships through that process was important, and very often they were formalised. So there were really great examples of people coming together around an agreement, a terms of reference, if you like, in working parties representing those different sectors. Very frequently community members were involved in that as well. And again, we saw that people, those partnerships tended, when they were set up very well, to have a long life. The collaborations often stayed in place after the development of the city visional plan to oversee its implementation. And and sort of assess and develop milestones and monitor success of it. So a really good sort of homework there about the time to develop that connection with other players. We also saw that leveraging those partnerships, those cross-industry, cross-sector partnerships was very successful in attracting investment. And there are really great examples of that happening, particularly in the UK, where the recognition of the strength that those industry partnerships gave people targets like smart city. We're suddenly becoming a smart city through this process. And we saw examples from Reading, for example, where they were granted millions of pounds in support of projects around transport, energy, the sort of things that had been coming up in the development of the city plan. Similarly, there was funding for heritage through heritage lottery types of grant programs because it was demonstrated that this partnership approach was robust and there was a commonality to the thinking. Being really clear, as Leanne has mentioned, about the role of each player in there is important. And Newcastle, for example, have identified themselves as being a provider, a leader, a collaborator, a planner, an advocate, whereas other players, you can see on the slide there, brought different things to the table. So the essential message about this learning was the time taken to, I guess, fertilise the land before embarking on the planning process in bringing the significant and influential and important players together around a common understanding of what was to be achieved and who was going to bring what to the table to help give effect to that.
So the next key finding was really about moving into actually the delivery of the engagement process and the preparation of the plan, the importance of exciting people's imagination. So we are asking people to think about the future. And one of the first conversations that we had in preparing the original work we did for Darabin was just a question about, well, how far ahead should we be asking people to think about? And should it be like 10 years? So there's a sense of kind of, if you like, groundedness to it. Should it be 30 or 50 years? And what came through very strongly from the research was actually that you needed to create a space for people to really think big. And while we're asking people about their everyday lives, we also want them to engage with some pretty complex, big, fat issues around the future of the city. And so actually a longer horizon was better. So 30 years or 40 years was actually a really good horizon to adopt because it enabled big conversations to happen. And particularly when they were led by government, obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of people turn up and want to talk about really local specific issues they're having right now. That can, they're obviously very important, but they can kind of constrain or clutter the preparation of a vision or a plan. So having that long horizon was really important. And with the exception of the disaster relief studies, most of them adopted a longer horizon, whereas when they were responding to a disaster, it made sense. You actually need to really respond to some of the immediate challenges here and now. But most of them adopted a sort of 20 to sort of 30-year vision. The other important finding, and this quote I thought was a great one from our Dublin interview, is it's not natural for everyone to think outside the box. You actually need out-of-the-box thinkers built into your process. This was a really, I think, it was a really great conversation we had with them about not inviting the usual suspects and recognizing that actually there are a lot of technical challenges that you're going to talk about, but actually if you have too many technical experts in the room, they can be too connected to the current problem solving challenges to think big. And so therefore inviting people from different sectors like the community sector or the arts sector who can ask more questions focused on the why or why not, and not necessarily get stuck on perhaps the how, as you're evolving the development of the plan was really important. And personally, as an urban designer, as a planner, that was very helpful to hear, because I myself sometimes get stuck in like trying to have these big conversations, for example, about, say, affordable housing. It's hard not to get stuck in the day-to-day about governance challenges or the politics or development feasibility or all the sort of different challenges that we have. So that was a really key learning across the project about not inviting the usual suspects. Don't assume that because it's a plan, the planners have the answer. Really, the whole community and different stakeholders can bring really useful insights into it. Utilising engaging visual communication techniques was critical to all of them. And there's some really lovely examples we've included here about how that was done. So this first one you can see on the screen here is the city Fremantle's game of Frio Life that they developed. They asked people into a space, they gamified this problem they were having about housing diversity. And so they made these models which were to scale, and people could move tiles around the board to actually try and solve some of these problems. So they could move buildings, houses, cars, and trees and so on. But what was really, really critical about this game was you didn't play the game as yourself. You were actually invited to play the game as somebody else. So they really encouraged an empathetic response to thinking about the city. So you were asked to play as, for example, a single parent with 2 children, or an older person who perhaps had mobility challenges. And so that was a really clever way of actually making it engaging, gamifying it, but also drawing out a shared conversation and connecting people to each other. The city of Logan is a very diverse place. With they were telling us it's one of actually the most diverse communities in Australia in terms of cultural diversity. So very early on, they made the decision that any data, as much as possible, data and information should be translated into infographics and visuals. And so they built that into their process. Similarly, in Fremantle, as well as the game that they did here, they used, they had a graphic designer embedded in the strategic planning team, which enabled really nimble responses for them in terms of how they communicated their projects. Other examples about conceptualizing the future through different methods that were included in these studies that were really interesting. This is from Reading. They asked people to articulate what they wanted the news headlines to be in the future. And I think this is such a nice example because it's very tangible. And so people were able to say things like, I want Reading to be named UK's friendliest city, or I want us to be named #1 for UK creative industry apprenticeships. To finish the tour of Britain here in 2050 and build a park that's possible. So I really love this example because they're so tangible, but they're still thinking big. So it's just a nice way of actually capturing some of those ideas without, again, getting stuck in the detail about how it's done, but really setting the scene about what's being sought to be achieved. This next example comes from Dublin. And as I said at the beginning, none of these plans tried to draw a 3D model or an image of the city, a visualization of the city of exactly what it would look like, because it's really difficult. As you know, like the cities we have today and the technology we have today was almost impossible to imagine, I think, if you were doing this, trying to imagine it 30 years ago. And this is, I think, a really interesting example. So in Dublin, they actually included in here a day in the life of a city. And so here you have someone, and this is about the transport challenges of the city. And so it says here that, Stephen prepares to leave his apartment on George's Quay at 6:30 a.m. He kisses the heads of his husband and 3 sleeping children, takes a quick look out the window of his 12th floor apartment and sees blue skies, a perfect morning for flying. He makes the 2-minute walk to the underground station. He walks through the sensor barriers, which detect from his mobile phone that he's heading to a flight in Madrid. The fare is immediately deducted from his bag, which is scanned as he walks through, and he lands in Madrid 75 minutes later. So it's this vision of a seamless mobility. But in my mind, this could be like 3 years away. This is not actually that transformative. And it just demonstrates the difficulty of imagining our futures. Right? And of course, this was done a few years before COVID. It doesn't even anticipate a world state where people aren't moving around the world at the moment. So it is difficult. And I think that's why a lot of these visions particularly do focus on these aspirational statements. And those Reading examples, I think, are really nice, tangible ones that people can imagine together and then focus on.
Thanks, Leanne. The fifth finding was about building consensus through the process and not to rush it. Almost exclusively in the projects we looked at, they occurred over a number of years, sometimes many years in the making. We've talked a bit about the groundwork, and this finding builds on that. If we can go to the next. You'll see here a lovely quote from Fremantle for their project, that because they did have that consensus and had worked with multiple stakeholders to build their plan, it was seamless. In fact, it went through a very similar kind of outcome to the attracting funding as well. So adopt an expansive view of community. This really came through very strongly from all of the players about thinking through your stakeholder analysis really carefully, and community is not just a community. And the innovation that we saw that really built upon this recommendation was where people were brought together around their artist communities and their youth communities and their sporting communities, so that there were these wonderful ideas and thoughts coming into the process in quite sort of niche ways as well. That process also helped to really build trust between the players, and the comment was made many times to us that it's really hard to talk futures with somebody if they're still disgruntled about something that's gone on in the past. And we did actually see examples of things that had stalled and needed to be rebuilt, where there was a lack of trust either in the sponsoring body. And in fact, there were recommendations made by some of the participants in this research that there was a mediation process that may need to occur. If you're not even at the starting line to undertake this work, then you need to perhaps go back and sort something out before you can launch off, if you like, and start to talk about futures and a sense of hope around that. So doing a good level of homework about who is in the community and what those levels of trust are, and laying the groundwork, if you like, to build that. There was a process for many in looking at the power imbalances between the different players and ensuring that the voices of those who are typically less powerful in communities were heard. In Detroit, there was an example where people really were quite apathetic about the approach because of that perception of a lack of trust and a power imbalance with government. And so there was not a huge take-up initially of the work, and the need to go back and create that shared sense of ownership around the process. Laying down some principles in that process was also really important. The way it was described many times was the framing, designing, maintaining continuum, and framing the process was really about building that consensus early with everybody to make sure that people were on the same page with undertaking the work of developing a city vision. And making it count. A really lovely quote that if a vision calls for a carbon neutral future, then it must be able to demonstrate meaningful steps to achieving agreed targets for the community to embrace it. And while we didn't have, there wasn't one particular way that we found of people having reporting mechanisms, there were different methods. There was all of the plans that we saw were able to demonstrate that line or that link to actually implementation and making it count and being able to show in the future that the plan had meaning and depth and was going to make a difference.
Great. And the last key finding was really about what happens next. So it was really important that in the preparation of the plan, it was demonstrated that it will be taken seriously and it will be implemented. What was really intriguing, I think, was the fact that most of the plans, their successes, particularly focused on the delivery of programs. For example, education programs, business programs, more often than not than specific tangible outcomes such as a policy change or a commitment to capital investment. That to me was particularly surprising because, as someone who works in the very spatial world of physical infrastructure and places, it was really interesting to hear from a lot of the people who were still responsible for implementing these plans that that's where they felt they'd had the greatest impact. And equally, because a lot of these are done by local councils, they don't always have their hands on the levers to say they'll commit to, for example, new public transport services. But when they focused on what they could influence, they could have a lot of success. So the City of Logan was a great example. So their vision was for a smarter city and to be the home of innovation. And some of their early successes were the delivery of a business incubator in town. So a space that particularly small business entrepreneurs and enterprises could come to. And also education programs. They have a very young community. And so they were connecting the business sector to mentoring opportunities for young people. It was really inspiring work, and it was interesting for them. And actually, we should say that a lot of the people we interviewed actually really relished the fact that they actually were given a bit of space to reflect on what they had done, because they're so stuck in the middle of it, sometimes still implementing it. And so it was quite interesting for us to sort of share our findings as we went. And this was one that they all found helpful to understand, that many of them were in the same boat, that it actually was those sort of programs that could be delivered more readily than, say, infrastructure, and that was a shared challenge. The way that the plan is measured and the way that was approached was really different across all of the plans that we looked at. Importantly, there was no conclusive finding that we found in this work that setting a target or measurable was needed or necessarily beneficial. We sort of heard from some it was helpful, it sort of kept people focused, but for others it became a hindrance because it wasn't well defined, or they didn't have the money to keep measuring it, and it just exposed them to a sense that they weren't delivering. For me, this is particularly interesting is how you set these targets. This was my favourite example of these, which was Copenhagen's city plan, and it includes objective measurements. For example, that 50% of trips to work and study in Copenhagen are by bike. But it also includes really compelling subjective measurements, like 2/3 of Copenhageners consider the city to be clean. To me, that's really great because it's really actually starting to tap into how do people feel about their city, not just the hard metrics that are kind of easy to measure from a distance. And so it really requires ongoing engagement with how people feel about their city and their role and responsibility in helping to grow a city where people feel connected and safe and engaged. Other plans, for example, the Newcastle plan didn't really include targets, but included indicators. So they didn't necessarily set a target and say we're going to achieve this certain thing, but they said we're going to monitor, for example, to measure economic success. They're going to monitor the growth of small businesses that are registered on the Australian Business Register in Newcastle. So they just said, here are the things we'll track to see how we're going, but we're not going to set a hard target. And so there was a real diversity across the different cities and how they approach this, and which I think will be really interesting to touch base with them again in 5 years actually and see what's happening. Others, a couple of them use the sustainable development goals as the framing device for their plans, which I thought was also very interesting, and I'm seeing that coming through more and more in a lot of work in urban design and planning. And importantly, this last one is that you have to set up the organisation to follow through on the city plan. So there were, again, a mix of conditions that we found. Some organisations were better set up to follow through, others weren't as ready, and they sort of had a sense of, didn't we do that and it's over? And equally, we talked to a couple of people who, if you like, had inherited the plan. And it was really helpful to hear their reflections on whether it helped them now do their work. So if they were being asked to do, a streetscape plan for their city, could they pick up the city vision and plan, and was it helpful? And some of the more esoteric plans, which were quite evocative and compelling, they found difficult to know what to do with, whereas some of the more hard ones were easier, but perhaps not as visionary. So there was a real diversity, but the important thing is that there's that through line from the beginning, the vision, and all the way through to the implementation.
Can I just jump in quickly, Leanne? And we've had a question come through in the chat. You mentioned sharing the findings with the interviewees as you went through. Are you planning to share the research report? It sounds like a few people would be interested to read that.
Yes, so the research report was prepared for the City of Darebin, so we just have to confirm with them whether they are happy for us to do that. We have written a short summary article which is on the Cities People Love website, which I'll talk to in a minute as well. So there is a summary there that you can go to, and we've also included a link to all of the 10 city plans, plus a couple of others, and we're building a bit of a library there for people to use as a resource.
Fantastic, thanks.
Thanks.
So a quick look at the key findings that we've been through. I'm just very conscious of time too, Leanne, so I might just keep going. But there were other things that came out of it for us as part of the project. And if we go to the next, we were just overwhelmed with how generous people were to talk to us. Some of the people had been working on their project for many years. For example, in Christchurch, people had been involved for 10 years in the work and were absolutely passionate about it. It was a labour of love. And then when they found out what we were doing, wanted to know what everybody else was doing. So we've kind of built a bit of a community of practice around it. The way we went about it worked for us with that combination of interviews and the deep dives. There were lots of similarities, more so than differences in preparation of the city plans. And yet, you know, the successful plans are all purpose for place. And so everyone was beautifully unique in its own way as well.
Great, thanks, Des. That's probably a good place to pause, actually, and maybe ask one of our poll questions. So if we can ask you, Astrid, we're really interested to, if you could post the second question, Astrid. We're really interested to sort of hear back from people about what they, what we've just shared with them, what you think.
Okay, you should all see the poll up on your screens now. Oh, yeah, we've got responses coming through.
People can use the chat if there's not.
I see we've got another question there while we're waiting for the poll results about who owns the vision or the plan. Have you come across any tension?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think because, well, maybe I'm going to jump to a conclusion, but I think because we were looking at really successful examples, we heard anyway from the people who put them together that ownership was a shared thing, that actually lots of people felt that they owned them. But to be fair, in our research, we didn't ask the community if they felt that they're connected to them and so on. But I'm sure, I think because we focused on examples that demonstrated great community engagement as well, we heard that. If we'd looked at others, we may not have heard that.
All right, well, it looks like the polling has slowed down, so we'll end that question there. And what do we have as a winner? The key learnings in people's favourites so far. Oh, and all of the above. So there you go. Bit of everything. Great.
We would, I want to make sure we have enough time for a bit of dialogue at the end, but we would really like to take the opportunity to also just share a little bit about the Cities People Love platform that Desley and I are working on. So we did post a research article that summarised the key findings from this Future of Cities research onto this platform. I'm not sure if people have seen this yet. We launched last month, and we're really keen to share what we're doing and invite people to participate. So Cities People Love is, it's been created to, it's a research platform, it's a curated research platform to engage and empower communities to influence policy and practice. And it's about building an evidence base that's focused on the public interest. And so obviously this comes from our own personal passions for creating great cities that are good for everybody, and also from a very practical, arising from some of the very practical challenges that we're seeing in how this is happening or not happening in planning for our cities. So the intention and the ambition of this is that it connects industry, government, researchers, and the community into a shared conversation about the city. I've dropped in the URL there, so you can go to it in your own time. We just wanted to share our first engagement activity with you. So this really built on, or was connected to the dialogues that we were having about cities' futures, and obviously connected to what we were experiencing at the time. And we were based in Melbourne, so particularly experiencing a long lockdown. And so we put this question out there to the community about what was the city that they wished to return to. And that taps into that comment about the Christchurch example about, well, how can we come back better? And I know a lot of people are talking about this. We really wanted to ask the community what they thought. We did this by creating a shared vision of the city. So we asked people what was the city that they wished to return to. And then we worked with an illustrator and a web developer to actually create an interactive visual that captured this. I'm just going to switch my screen share to this. So this is something you can go to in your own time. And so every few days, this illustration changed as people responded. And we've captured everyone's comments in here. So you can go in and click on a yellow dot and actually see what Joe wanted to see. And the illustration is actually really, really delightful. And you can see all the different very personal comments about what people want to see in the city. And really, it's one of those illustrations you can zoom around and dive in, and there's just some really wonderful, wonderful aspects in there. We've also then drawn some analysis out of that, and here are the 10 themes that we heard about the city that people wish to return to. We're about to launch our second edition of publication and research, which is focused on this issue of housing and homelessness, but particularly focused on the concept of home and what does home mean to people. But you can see there was a really lovely cross-section of issues and that people were passionate about, and that wanted and what they wanted to see focused on as we sort of think about our future cities.
And there's a comment, somebody's asking, can you just go back one slide to have another look at that back one? Yeah. No.
The illustration?
Illustration.
Yeah, so there's so much in this illustration. In fact, it was my birthday last week and my team turned this into a jigsaw for me. So I get to do investigate it piece by piece, which is really delightful. So there's just really lovely stories in here. And we've pulled out a couple of the illustrations as individual images. You can find this on the website, and this is all still live. You can go in and just explore this as well in your own time. We would love to partner with you. So it was one of the key reasons we're keen to share it today. Is it's a curator platform, but it's an open platform. So there's an editorial board that reviews the content, but we're open to anyone submitting an idea or a research question that they even have about the city. Why does the city work the way it does? And we'll connect that question to academics or practitioners who can answer that question for you. We are focused on building up a research base that can be a resource for decision makers in our city and connect directly to community. So if you are a researcher or in university, or a practitioner who's got some great lived experience that you want to share, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. There are the details. And so you can email us directly, or you can also follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn to participate. I'll leave it there, and we'd love to open up to any questions that people have about what we shared or about cities people love as well.
There are some questions coming through. Just quickly, the board game was Fremantle, folks, for those who are asking that question. There's quite a lot on their website still about that. Leanne, we've got a question from Claire asking if the city plan research and findings are just as applicable for regional, rural visions and plans. And my response to that would be yes. It's really about the way the the process that was brought together to develop the plans. And I know we have looked at cities primarily, not all big cities, however, but I mean, my view is yes, it would be entirely applicable to a different area as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I see another question there about sharing the link to the article that you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. I think everyone's just hungry for a bit of information.
Okay,
great.
Sure. I can post that into the chat. I'll do that now.
We'll share all these resources as well on the Facebook page that we mentioned earlier. I'll just repost that link.
There's another question about, was politics ever an obstacle? If so, how was it overcome?
Yeah.
I mean, there were definitely examples that people shared with us about tension at the beginning of the process, and obstacles where one group or one entity, a local government, for example, felt it had primary ownership of the process. And I think, the recommendations speak really clearly about the need for that collaborative, cross-industry, cross-sector approach to not just developing these plans, but thinking through even what they are and what they stand for. So, I mean, there are some really great leaders who emerged through those processes, not just necessarily in government, who helped to broker those conversations and bring about that more egalitarian sort of framework.
And I think just to add to that too, that comment you made earlier, Des, about the fact that recognising where you're starting from. So if you are starting from a position where there's a lot longer term acrimonious issues that are in the community, you actually can't just pretend they're just going to not be there when you start a city vision conversation. So having that kind of mediation role is really critical if there are political issues that are going to swamp, I think, the preparation of a plan.
I see as well, Margaret's asked a question about universities and whether that's been an aspect of any of the plans that you've investigated.
Yeah, so the Reading example was really interesting because it was actually led by the university. And so they brought a really, I think, unique approach because they were coming at it as researchers. And so they'd done a lot of research into what makes a good city plan and what makes a good city. And so they had they led the whole thing and then brought others into that process, which I thought was really interesting and that you might be interested in, Margaret, and looking into further.
That example, Leanne, it was very applied to their student faculty as well. They actually had students designing pop-up futuristic kind of incubators and things like that, where you could physically walk into spaces and experience them.
Yeah, they fitted out a bus with lots of information about what the future city could look like to take it to people, and they parked it outside train stations and shopping centres so that people could walk into it as well. It was really interesting. I've just posted the link to the article for Future City Vision and just the general Cities People Love link as well too for people.
Thank you. I can see there's another question there about informing government visioning following the new Local Government Act. I imagine, City of Darebin, you're already doing this work for them. It might be something that is more broadly of interest to other local governments.
Yes, definitely. And this is one of the questions they had as we were going is what does the new Act mean for them? What does it mean to do a deliberative plan? And how can they best do it? I don't know if you want to add to that, Des.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think, given all councils have to do this work, some of these things are just like a tip sheet, could apply. It's definitely applicable to that, that part of the new Act.
I see that as Oh, no, sorry, I just lost it. Something popped up and then it went away. So in terms of the future research that you might be focusing on, do you have any plans to expand that, or open to any suggestions?
So there's no immediate plans to particularly focus on this topic again. One of the things that we obviously learned is that there's just so much amazing knowledge about how to do this type of work out there. You'll see on the Cities People Love article that we wrote that we've actually dropped in the library of the case studies, and we've actually just put in a call out too that if anyone's got great examples, we can put them in there and actually build a shared resource, so we're all kind of learning together on this one, and also just kind of like we're all time poor as well, so we're trying to build that as a resource too for people to just go to. Here are some great examples that other people have found. Just go to these ones. You know, we can get to great outcomes faster if we sort of collaborate on these research projects as well.
Great.
I would love to do more research in this space. I should also say too, if anyone wants us to.
Yeah, I'll pop that question in the chat, and if anybody has any ideas about what else they might like to see or any thoughts on opportunities that they might have identified. So we've got another question there. I know you mentioned this was about visioning rather than direct implementation, but did you find that there were good examples of tying visions to make prescriptive delivery mechanisms or plans?
They did go to varying details in terms of the prescription of how they would be delivered. As Des said, they didn't include like a really prescriptive action plan, like we're going to build a new bike path on this road, for example. But they did, and Newcastle is a really good example, I think, of articulating partnerships that would be required to deliver on some of the key aspirations. They talk about kind of what it would take, and then who would need to come together to deliver it, and what council's role was, because that was a council-led plan. So I think it was more about how you get there than specific ones. The exception was Bristol's plan, which has these amazing like double-page spreads of a year-by-year blow on what they're going to try and achieve, and it's incredibly diverse. It includes a lot of a whole range of topics, including, for example, health and targets around reduction in smoking, number of people smoking, or challenging issues like reducing domestic violence. So it's really broad and quite specific. But equally, their plan was the one that we that on one of the earlier slides, they were very clear it was a live document. And so they have this incredibly comprehensive piece of work, and it's live, the intended to be a live document. So we didn't interview that city, but it would be really interesting to understand the resources that they're putting to it to keep that live document going, and to keep what is quite a prescriptive set of year-by-year targets live. But it was, there's so much clarity in that plan about what they care about and what they're trying to achieve, because it does go to that prescription.
Someone has made an interesting and very pragmatic point about budget, and budget being a real barrier for some local governments. Was that anything that emerged through any of your discussions or interviews? It seems as though a lot of these processes that you've highlighted are, you know, as a result of their innovative and engaging approach, could be quite time or resource intensive. So
yeah,
is there a right version perhaps?
Yeah, so I can see the comment from Kate there is particularly about the interactive graphic that we did. So that budget was not particularly big. The way Cities People Love works is, I should also say, is it's a not-for-profit. It's not intended, so there's a lot of volunteer time as well. But we do make sure that we pay the creatives who are working on it for their time, so the illustrator and the web developer. But that was not a big budget to get that done. It's more about getting the right minds in a room, and we did this all via Zoom to like design it. That was actually what was the power of that, I think. And then the actual delivery was actually not that complicated. There are such smart people out there about how to connect like the illustrator and the web developer worked really closely together to make it as seamless and as possible and easy as possible. In terms of the city plans that we looked at, there were obviously varying budgets, and we didn't ask specifically questions about budget. Sometimes they provided a little bit of information around that, but a lot of them were not that high end, if you like. They weren't that polished as well. Some of them you can do, I think, a lot on a small budget. Most of them were done in-house, from what I understood. They didn't necessarily engage a lot of consultants. They built a team in-house to actually deliver it.
But they had, many of them had, one dedicated resource. So in Hobart, there was one person who was actually coordinating and leading the entire process. But they piggybacked onto things that were happening, the local markets, and there wasn't a huge budget for that at all.
And I think that's probably something we haven't touched on enough, is the importance of getting the right people to lead them. And so that person in Hobart, she was just incredibly impressive and really, really embraced her challenge, which was how do you create a communal vision, particularly when there are key challenges around something like sense of place and identity. And so she did a lot of research herself and really, I think, led a really compelling process. But she was given the time and space to do that. That was her sole focus, which was important.
Mm.
One of the other challenges, obviously, is people move about. So even as we're approaching some of these cities, for a couple of them, they were like, we're happy to talk to you, but actually, even though that plan's only 5 years old, no one's still here who was involved. So that is a real challenge, I think, in the flow through. Whereas others, as Des talked about, like in Christchurch, they've been involved for 10 years, and they were passionate about it. They just really were connected from the beginning to the end and making sure it happened. So I think that's also a challenge to think about as people are pulling these together. How do you make it robust enough so anyone can pick it up and it's still meaningful?
I'm scrolling through. I think we've covered off the questions that have come through. Please keep sending them through if you have any more. Oh, yeah, I can see as well that there's a comment there about the importance of asking the right questions in the research to draw it out. And I did like that point that you made about, what was it? It's not natural to think outside the box in Dublin. So it's about asking the right questions of the right people and having that mix of ideas in the room. I think that's really a really valuable takeaway for me.
Absolutely, and it was a bit of a hard lesson sometimes to hear that as a technical person you might be a bit obsolete in these processes because you're too tied to current problems. But it was just so helpful to have it framed that way. It was really great.
Mm. All right.
Any other questions from anybody?
Looks like we've covered off all of the questions that we've received. Getting a lot of thank yous, a lot of, I suspect that there's going to be a lot of interest in whatever information you put out into the world. So we will make sure that we capture all of the resources that you have and get them on that Facebook page so that people can ask questions and get in touch with you as they need to.
Great.
But are there any other closing comments, Des or Leanne, that you'd like to make?
No, so I'm just reading those as well. No, look, thanks everyone for their interest. As Des said, it was the opportunity to this project was a bit of a gift from COVID, which is not something you'll hear very often. So I just really encourage everyone else to embrace similar techniques. There are people out there who want to talk and share and are happy to share, and it's just such a rewarding experience, and we're just happy to pass along that generosity and share it today as well.
I think one of the big takeaways for me is about laying the groundwork, spending a lot of time building the foundation for going out to have a conversation about a city vision and plan, getting your, those key players in place, forming those agreements, building that trust, and going out as a collective, if you like, to the community rather than one level of government or one government department.
So it all comes back to relationships and trust in the end. Surprise, surprise. That's our business.
And time, giving them time.
And time. But it's good to see that we can continue to work through the COVID barriers and still do exciting projects like this.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everybody who joined the session today and contributed through comments and questions. It was a really interesting session, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot more to follow up, a few more follow-up questions on the Facebook page.